Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. A couple days ago, I started a series, kind of like a little mini series that we're going to be doing in preparation for spring, specifically in preparation for planting seeds. In that video, I talked a little bit about why I like to start the majority of my garden from seed. And if you have decided that you would like to also start at least some part of your garden from seed, then I hope that this series will be really helpful for you. Today we're going to be talking about choosing which seeds to purchase. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to decide what to grow in your garden, and then at the end I'm going to share a couple of my favorite seed companies. Now your seed companies may end up being completely different from mine, but I just wanted to share a couple of my favorites. So I've got some of my favorite seed catalogs here today. I just want to chat a little bit about how I decide what to grow in my garden, and especially if you're new to gardening, just some things you might want to consider when you're deciding what to grow in your garden. So if you're new to gardening, or even if you've gardened before but you're new to starting from seed, it can kind of feel overwhelming. And I know when I first started gardening, I wasn't really sure where to start. I purchased a lot of my plants, or actually really that first year, I think I purchased all my plants from transplants. So when I decided to start learning to grow my own seeds, it seemed kind of overwhelming at first. I promise you that starting seeds is not as challenging as it sounds. So the first thing you're going to want to know when you're deciding what to grow in your garden, and this applies honestly whether you are starting seeds or buying transplants, you're going to want to know your climate. Now, by your climate, I don't really mean your growing zone. I think that growing zones in a lot of gardening circles, especially people who are new to gardening, kind of get misunderstood a little bit and given a little more importance than they really need. Basically, the growing zone, the only thing the growing zone is going to tell you is how cold you can expect it to get in your area over the winter. So that is really important if you're looking at growing perennial plants, which are plants that you expect to live over the winter and come back for several years. But for most of the plants that we grow in the vegetable garden, we are planning to just grow those over the summer. We're not expecting them to live through the winter. We're planning to start completely new in the spring. So for that type of gardening, your growing zone really isn't as helpful as a lot of people think it is, because it doesn't really tell you much about your climate except for your coldest temperatures you can expect. Now, of course, there is some correlation between a higher number growing zone and overall warmer weather. But if you look at different parts of the world, there are many parts of the world that have the same zone but extremely different growing conditions. They may have different growing season lengths, they may have different humidity levels, they may have different high summer temperatures, because the growing zone really tells you your low temperatures. It doesn't really give you that much indication about your high summer temperatures. So as I said, it's not really all that relevant to vegetable gardening for the most part. So what I actually mean when I'm talking about climate, the most important consideration is your frost-free growing season. What that means is how many days you have in your growing season that you can expect to not have a frost. So that's going to start at your last spring frost date. It's going to end at your first frost date in the fall. However much time is between those two dates is the amount of time you have to grow plants that are frost sensitive, which is a large part of what we grow in the vegetable garden. So what you're going to want to do first is just do a search online. Find out the average last frost date for your area and the average first frost date for your area. And you're going to want to find out the difference between those two dates, however many days that is your frost-free growing season. Now, these dates that you're going to find online, they're not going to be exact, they're going to be estimates. So you don't want to use them as a hard and fast rule, but you do want to know those dates to give you a general guideline. So if you want to pause this video, go ahead and look up those dates, write down your last frost date in the spring, your first frost date in the fall, and the amount of days in between that. That will be a good reference point for the rest of this video. So now that you've located those really important dates, we're going to be able to talk a little bit more about what you can expect to grow in your garden. Now, I just want to make a quick note that there are some vegetable plants that will survive a frost and can be grown outside this frost-free growing season. I'm planning to do a completely separate video dedicated to cool weather crops versus warm weather crops and the differences between them. So stay tuned for that in the future if that's something that you're interested in. So for the most part, with the exception of those cool weather crops, you're going to want to make sure that the plants that you're growing can grow their entire life cycle and yield a harvest during the amount of days that you have between your two frost dates. So what you're going to want to look for is what's called the maturity date, or the days to maturity. It'll be called something similar to that in a seed catalog. Now, for plants like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, a lot of those plants are really sensitive to frost and will die as soon as you get your first frost. So you want to make sure that you have a long enough growing season to be able to grow whatever plants you choose and to be able to harvest them before your first frost comes. That's why it is so important to know the length of your growing season. And if your growing season is on the shorter side, and honestly, even if it isn't on the shorter side, often it's really best to start a lot of those plants ahead of time inside. The plants with longer days to maturity, because often that is the only way you'll be able to get a harvest at all, or it will increase the amount of harvest that you're able to get. So when choosing what plants to grow, you're going to want to grow what's going to do well in your area. We already talked about the frost-free growing season and making sure you choose plants that can grow within however long your frost-free growing season is, but there are other factors to consider. You're going to want to take into account your summer temperatures. How hot does it get in your summer? That can be something completely separate from how long your summer is. You're also going to want to take into account how much rainfall you have, what the humidity is like in your area, if there are any plant diseases especially prevalent in your area. If there are plant diseases in your area, you're going to want to choose varieties that are resistant to those. The best way to find out that specialized information is to talk to local gardeners. Now, if you're on Facebook, most areas I find do have a gardening group local to many different areas. I'm here in Connecticut, and there is a vegetable gardening group on Facebook specific to Connecticut. And I find in that group, I'm able to get some really great recommendations on varieties that do well in my area specifically. So I am happy to recommend varieties that do well, but you may have better success if you find varieties that are recommended by people local to you that are growing in your exact same growing conditions than you may by following recommendations from me or anybody else that you may find online or across the country. Another thing that you can do is you can stop at local farm stands, you can stop at local farmers markets, you can see what varieties they're selling, you can even talk to the farmers there, and you can get some ideas of what they prefer to grow, what does really well for them in the area. By doing that, you can get some really great recommendations about varieties that are likely to do well for you as well. So the next thing you want to consider when you're deciding what to grow, and this may seem a bit obvious, but it isn't always as obvious as you would think, so I'm going to go ahead and mention it anyway, is to grow what you like to eat. Now, if there are vegetables that you really love, that you find that are taking a significant amount of your grocery budget, why not try growing those yourself? If you're already purchasing it, you know that you love it, you know that your family eats it, that's a great thing to try growing. Now, there is something to be said for experimenting, for trying new things, and it is true that many vegetables taste so much better homegrown than they do from the store. So it is also true that, while you may think you don't like a vegetable, if you've only had the grocery store version, you may actually enjoy the homegrown version. That being said, I find that it makes the most sense to grow vegetables that you know you're going to eat, that you know you and your family are going to enjoy. Because honestly, if you're not going to eat it, if you're not going to enjoy it, it's not really worth your resources the way it would be if it was going to be something that brings you joy, something that saves you money on your grocery budget, and something that allows you to eat what you're already eating, but in a more healthful and delicious way. So as I said, I know that sounds kind of obvious, but I have found myself in a situation where I'm growing vegetables that I don't really like, that no one in my family really eats, because I'm hoping that if I have them, I'll be able to convince myself to change my mind. And what happens often is those vegetables either end up kind of going bad, getting given to the chickens, or we end up eating them and no one really enjoys them, and I find that I'm not looking forward to it the way I would, vegetables that we know that we love and enjoy. So the next thing that I want to mention does kind of go along with that, and that has to do with growing something that you're excited to grow. Now, if you love tomatoes, but you've only ever had tomatoes from the grocery store, most grocery stores will offer your classic round red tomato. But you know what? Tomatoes come in so many other amazing varieties. So if you love tomatoes, why not try something fun and new and exciting? Now, if you get really excited about the classic red tomato, then go ahead and grow that. But if you're excited about getting to enjoy variety and the types of vegetables that you're not able to necessarily find at the grocery store, it can really be so much fun and make your garden and your harvest time and your eating so much more enjoyable if you have something really fun and exciting that you're passionate about growing, passionate about eating. And it can really help, especially if you have kids in the garden, grow something that they're excited about, because if they help you grow it and they're really excited about growing it, they're also more likely to be excited about eating it as well. So now I just want to pull out a couple seed catalogs from some of my favorite seed companies, and I want to talk a little bit about some things you may want to look for in a seed catalog to help you decide what to grow for your area. So let's take this seed catalog here, and we're going to turn to the tomato section because there are just so many varieties of tomatoes, and because it is my favorite vegetable to grow. Now you're going to want to notice a couple things here. For example, notice 62 days here, 55 days here, 60 to 65 days. These days are your estimated maturity dates. Remember we talked about earlier in this video about knowing your frost-free growing season? Now all of these days here, here you can see they're just labeled as days. You may also see those labeled as days to maturity, maturity date, it might be abbreviated DTM. In different seed catalogs, you'll see that abbreviated different ways. But what that means, this is how long that plant is going to take to harvest for you or to bear fruit for you. Now, just to make things a little bit trickier and complicate your life a little bit, seed catalogs do not really do this in a standard way. Tomatoes, for example, usually started inside ahead of time. You're usually going to start that in your house about 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date, or buy a started transplant that will be that age that can go out after your frost is over. This maturity date that we see here, so for example, this 62 days, that's not talking about when you start your seed. That's talking about when you take that started plant that's already 6 to 8 weeks old and when you stick it in the ground. So from when you stick it in the ground, you're going to expect to wait about 62 days to your first harvest. Now, this is also assuming ideal growing conditions. That's assuming that the weather is perfect. That's assuming that your soil is the perfect fertility level for this plant. That's assuming no pest pressure or disease issues. So the reality is it might take longer than this, but that is what you can expect under perfect conditions. So let's turn to a different plant. How about peas? So here you see the page with the peas. Here we see 70 days maturity date here, 58 days here, 60 days here. Peas are a plant that is generally direct sown. What that means is that you take the seed, you just stick it outside in the soil wherever it's going to grow. You don't have to worry about starting your plant inside ahead of time. So these maturity dates are not referring to when you transplant a plant. They're referring to when you stick a plant or when you stick a seed in the ground. That's when you can expect to harvest it. Now, in your seed catalog, you can see here at the beginning of the peas section, they give you some different seed catalogs. Different companies will be slightly different, but they're mostly structured the same way. They give me some information here about growing peas in general, and this tells me sowing outdoors. Now you can notice in here, I don't see anything about starting these ahead of time inside, where back in the previous section, the tomato section we were looking at, it does say to start early inside before your last frost date. So that's kind of how you figure out what the maturity dates are referring to, whether they're referring to sticking a seed in the ground or whether they're referring to transplanting a started plant into the ground. It's a little bit tricky until you really get used to it, but once you get used to it and you know how most plants are grown, it's going to make a lot more sense. So let's grab another company's seed catalog to compare. So with these seed catalogs here, you can see I've got them both open back to the tomato page. I'm going to show you something else that you may want to look for in the seed catalog. Notice here, this tomato variety says F1 hybrid. I think actually all of the tomato varieties on this page say F1 hybrid. So let's look at another page. Notice these varieties here. Don't mention anything about F1 hybrid. Your seed catalogs should tell you whether the plant that you're looking at is an F1 hybrid, an open pollinated variety, or an heirloom variety. Now honestly, as far as growing plants, that's not going to matter a real lot unless you're planning to save seeds from your plant. Now, hybrid seeds are often confused with GMO seeds, Those are not the same thing. A GMO seed or a GMO is something that has been manipulated in a lab and its DNA has been changed to some extent. I honestly am not completely familiar with that process, and that's not really the focus of this video here. But a hybrid seed is naturally produced by crossing two different varieties. So say if you have a Brandywine tomato and a Dr. Weish's tomato, you take the pollen from one and put it into the flower of the other tomato to pollinate it, then those seeds are going to produce a different variety of tomato, but there wasn't any genetic manipulation done. That was really just the natural result of cross-pollination. And that is basically what a hybrid is. So a hybrid is a controlled cross between a couple of varieties to try to get specific results. So I personally don't have any issue with growing hybrid seeds in my garden. For the most part, I do prefer to grow heirloom seeds and open pollinated varieties, because when you save the seeds from an heirloom variety or an open pollinated variety, that's basically a guarantee that the seeds that you save, as long as they weren't cross-pollinated, it's basically a guarantee that the seeds will produce a plant similar to the parent plant. With a hybrid, you don't really know, because the parents of that hybrid plant are completely different. Often you don't know what they are. So seeds from that hybrid plant could be like the hybrid plant. They could be like either the parents, or they could be completely different. We don't really know exactly what genetics it has that could come out in the plant. So while you can save seeds from a hybrid plant, you don't really know what you're going to get. An heirloom variety is a variety that has been stabilized. It's been around for many years. You can save the seeds from that variety and you can know what you're going to get. An open pollinated variety is similar. The only difference is that it may not have been around for as long as an heirloom, but it is still a stabilized variety. You can save the seeds and know what you're getting. So again, if you're interested in saving seeds, you want to pay attention to that. If you're not interested in saving seeds, it doesn't really matter as much. Often what you'll find is that hybrid varieties are often bred for disease resistance. They often will be a little bit more disease resistant, which can be a benefit depending on your goals. I did want to mention here that these varieties that I showed you that don't say anything about F1 hybrid, you can see the headline, you can see the header there. They're in the standard heirloom and open pollinated section. So that means every variety in that section you can assume is either heirloom or open pollinated. So here's another seed catalog which uses similar terminology. You can see here there's a section for open pollinated slicers. All of the tomatoes on this page are going to be open pollinated. If we turn to the next page, we get hybrid pink and red slicers. Those, unsurprisingly, are going to be hybrids. Now, you may also order from a company such as this. This is the Baker Creek Seed Catalog. Their company exclusively sells open pollinated and heirloom varieties. So you know that every variety in this catalog is going to be open pollinated or heirloom. They don't have any hybrids. So because of that, they probably don't really have that marked in this catalog, because that's exclusively what they sell. So another thing you may want to look for in your seed catalog is disease resistance. You can see here, this is the tomato section again. These are all different tomato diseases, and many of these plants shown here are bred to be resistant to those diseases. So for example, if we look at this one here, you can see that it shows T, LB, F1, and 2. So if we go up here to our key, we can find T, tobacco mosaic virus, LB is late blight, F1 and 2 is Fusarium races 1 and 2. So that means that this tomato variety here that we looked at is resistant to all of those diseases. So that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, about knowing what's likely to thrive in your area, knowing what diseases are prevalent in your area. One other thing that I want to mention that you'll want to look for in your seed catalog, and this will just be, for the most part, in the description, is growth habit. There are some plants that have different growth habits. Basically what that means is that they just grow in different ways. So take, for example, beans. Let's turn to the bean section in this catalog. Beans come in a couple different styles. You can get what's called a pole bean, which means that you need to support it with a pole or some sort of trellis, and that bean is going to climb. You can also get what's called a bush bean, which means it's going to stay littler. It doesn't really need to be supported. It's going to probably take up about the same amount of ground space, but it doesn't need vertical space to climb. So the type that you choose may vary depending on your goals in the garden. So let's take a look at this bean section. We can see here green bush beans. So those are the shorter variety of beans that don't need to be supported. That means everything in this section here is going to be green bush beans. Over here we have yellow bush beans. If we turn the page, here we can find pole beans. So everything in this section is going to be a climbing bean. It's going to need to be supported. Now you'll find similar variations with plants like cucumbers. Most cucumbers do like to climb and do need to be supported by a trellis, but you will find there are some varieties of cucumbers called bush cucumbers, which stay shorter and bushier. They don't need to climb. So depending on your situation, you may prefer one or the other. Tomatoes are similar. You'll find tomatoes categorized as either determinate or indeterminate. Basically, the indeterminate is the equivalent of a pole bean. It's not going to climb, but it will get really long, it will vine, it will definitely need support. Where a determinate tomato, while I would still recommend giving it support, it's going to be quite a bit shorter and take up quite a bit less vertical space. So depending again on what you're looking for and what your growth style is, that may make a difference as to what variety you choose. So the final thing that I want to talk about in this video, which is really all about choosing seeds, is I just wanted to mention a few of my favorite seed companies. Now I have 4 main seed companies that I'm going to mention. These are not the only seed companies I purchase from. I will purchase from other seed companies, but these are my 4 consistent seed companies that I do purchase from most years. The first one that I want to mention, I actually don't have a catalog for because they don't have a written catalog, and that is M.I. Gardener. So you can go online to the M.I. Gardener website, and they have all of their seeds listed in an online catalog or on the website. They have a really extensive selection of seeds. I've had really great results growing those seeds. They've had great germination. One of my favorite things about M.I. Gardener seeds is that they're only $2 a pack, which is a crazy good deal. And they offer free shipping. I think if you spend $20 or something like that, which is 10 packs of seeds, that's really not challenging to do. So I find that those seeds, they're a great deal. They have a great selection. I've had good results from them. So that is one of my go-to seed companies that I buy from every year. The next company that I want to mention is Pine Tree Seeds. We spent a lot of time looking at this seed catalog today. I really like Pine Tree Seeds. This is one of the first seed companies that I ordered from back when I very first started growing my own seeds. I have been really happy with their results. I've been really happy with their seeds. I've had consistently good results. They offer a good variety. I find that they do offer a really good selection of vegetables, but I find that they also offer more variety of flowers than a lot of other vegetable companies offer. So I do like to get some flowers from them. They also have a couple varieties that I find hard to find other places that I'll consistently buy here. They have a mix of hybrid varieties and heirloom and open pollinated varieties. So they've got lots of different choices. I find the prices are really reasonable. They are located in Maine, which I'm in Connecticut, so I'm also in New England. So their growing condition will be fairly similar to mine. So I do find that I can pretty much reliably count on their seeds doing well in my area. Now, this is the only seed company I order from regularly that is really local to me, and I order from many seed companies. So being local isn't really necessarily a deal breaker, but I do like to order from at least one company that's fairly local to me. I've been really happy with their seeds. The next company that I want to mention is Fedco Seeds. I did not actually place an order with Fedco this year, but this is the first year in a while that I haven't. I have many of my seeds left from last year. One thing I do really like about this company is that they are one of the few sources I can find for my silver slicer cucumbers. I love those cucumbers. I'm sure you've heard me rave about them before. I have gotten my seeds from Fedco. I did actually save my own seeds from those this year, so I didn't place an order with Fedco this year, but I most likely will be next year. I've been really happy with their seeds, been using them for years, great germination, great prices, great selection, all of that stuff. So I would recommend them as well. Finally, I want to mention Baker Creek. Baker Creek is my go-to for really unusual varieties. They offer a huge selection of varieties that you can't find. They're really challenging to find in many other places. So while I order a lot of my basic seeds from a lot of the other companies that I mentioned, I place an order with Baker Creek pretty much every year just because I always like to grow a few really unique things, and Baker Creek offers really unique things. I do also like that they they source exclusively open pollinated and heirloom varieties, which is great if you're interested in saving seeds. Nothing against hybrids, but I do really like to save my own seeds as much as I can. So I really enjoy them. Another thing I really like is you can see the beautiful photography in this catalog. I mean, I'm a very visual person, and so seeing all those beautiful photographs really does appeal to me. So I really enjoy this catalog as well. So I am going to link all of the seed companies that I mentioned in this video description. I highly recommend all of them. As I said, I place an order from all 4 of those most years. This year I placed an order from 3 of them. And there are many other seed companies out there that are great as well. So if you have any other favorite seed companies, go ahead and leave those in the comments. I would love to hear what seed companies you really like. Those are just a few of my favorites. So these are definitely not the only great seed companies. If you have another seed company you'd like to support, go for it. But if you're kind of not really sure where to begin, these are some great options to take a look at. So I hope that you'll join me again. I think in a few days I'll post another part to the seed starting series. I think next we're going to be talking about planning a seed starting schedule and how to decide what to start early versus what to direct sow. So if you're interested in that, definitely come back in a couple days and I will post that video for you. I hope you guys are having a great day and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.